If you're like me, you probably can't write a story without leaving a body count. And depending on what type of genre you're writing in, whether it be horror or action or sci-fi fantasy, whatever it is, typically a lot of drama can be created in life and death situations. And if you have life and death situations, you gotta have a little death in there too. So today I'm gonna give you some advice on how to write death scenes and how to kill off characters in the most effective, impactful way. What's up, guys? My name's Brandon McNulty. I'm a writer, and welcome to my writing channel. Today I'm going to talk about killing people, fictional people, and I'm going to give you some tips on how to get the most out of your characters' deaths. So the first tip I have for you is that you should never pull punches when it comes to death. And this is something that I see in a lot of stories, particularly like the horror genre. Oftentimes you'll have like a monster that's just a menace. It's just capable of extreme speed and extreme power, and it's just a death machine. And yet when it reaches the main characters, all of a sudden it's clumsy, or it all of a sudden loses whatever powers it had, or it just can't manage to get after the people it needs to kill. And it can be really disappointing in this regard. And I think this is just a classic example of writers who they're afraid to kill off characters. And you don't want to be one of those people, because if you're afraid to kill off characters, your reader is not in suspense. They know that you don't have what it takes to kill off a supporting character or a major character. My number 2 tip is to combine shock value with emotional impact. Now, a lot of younger writers tend to think that shock value alone is enough when it comes to death. And yes, we do like to be surprised when a character dies. Well, maybe we don't like it, but it's exciting. It throws us off. It draws us right into the story. If someone just dies and we expected them to live, that's a good thing for entertainment value. Now, it can be shallow, however, if there's not emotional impact along with it. If you just kill off characters just for the sake of killing them, it's just not going to resonate with the reader in the same way that a character's meaningful death will. And by a meaningful death, this can mean a lot of different things, but whenever you're killing off a character, ask yourself, does this character's death affect the rest of the characters in the story? Does it impact the main character? Does it have huge ramifications throughout the plot? These are things you should look for, as well as that shock value. Now, my number 3 tip, it also goes back to this idea of meaningful characters. And I think when it comes to making a character's death meaningful, one of the things to keep in mind is that you want to have a complete character die rather than a nobody. And when I talk about a complete character, this is a character we've gotten to know. We've seen them. They're well-rounded. They have a character arc. They have hobbies. They have interests. They have flaws. They have all kinds of things that a regular human being does. They're not just simply a random person who died for the sake of dying. Now, on the other hand, you have a lot of stories where maybe you have a mystery that opens up with like a prostitute dead in an alleyway, or you have just some old man dying in the opening pages, and we're supposed to care about that. But if you don't make us care about those people who die, it's just not going to have the same drive for the reader. Yes, it's an excuse for the story to happen. It's an excuse for the detectives to get on the job. But at the same time, it doesn't have the same amount of impact that if you have a character who you develop even over the course of one chapter, even if we just get to know that person a little bit. If you have a meaningful death with a complete character, that will always be more important than a nobody dying. My number 4 tip, hint at a promising future for a character before you kill them off. Now, this is one of my favorite ways of killing off characters because it's so effective, and when it's done well, it has a lot of emotional impact. And what I mean by this is that if you have a character and you convince the reader that maybe they have a promising relationship down the line, or maybe they're finally going to get into college, or they're finally going to get the job of their dreams, or they're going to be reunited with their family, or there's going to be some other great positive thing going on in their near future, and then you take that character away through death, your audience will feel that. It will have a ton of emotional impact. And I see this in a lot of different stories. I think in season 1 of Game of Thrones, right before Ned gets what he gets, what happens is there's that scene where we learn that Ned's going to be sent to the Wall and apparently going to be reunited with Jon Snow. And I remember when I was first watching that, I was like, oh man, I can't wait to see Ned and Jon Snow together. That's going to be so exciting. And then, well, it never happened. My number 5 tip, Be aware of death-related cliches. Now, there are tons of these cliches out there. I think one of the most popular ones is the final girl cliche. And this is something you see in slasher movies where you have a lot of teenagers and a bunch of them are just, they're rotten people, they're scumbags, and then you have this girl who's just a total saint, and she survives in the end because the monster only kills the bad people. And we've seen this so many times that we expect the final girl to survive. And when she does survive, we don't really care because it's been done before. Same thing goes for epic fantasy when the mentor is killed off. Oftentimes you have a story like Star Wars where Luke is learning from Obi-Wan, and then about the 3/4 mark of the story, Obi-Wan gets killed off or Gandalf gets killed off. This is something that happens in a lot of mentor-mentee stories, and there is symbolism involved. Usually when the mentor dies off, it's there to show that the hero has to pick up the torch and carry on the values, but when we see it so many times and we see it as often as we do, it's just too predictable at this point. So if you are using these type of tropes, the mentor, the protege, try to do something different with it. Ask yourself, is there a way I can have the mentor survive? Maybe the mentor becomes the villain, or maybe the mentor survives but the protege dies, and then what does that mean for the story? What does that mean for the plot? Those are types of examples of how you can just, subvert expectations and try to do something new. My number 6 tip is to ensure that there is an adequate reaction to a character's death. By this I mean that when a character dies, the other characters who survived should be reacting to it. They should be shedding tears. They should be making mistakes at work. They should be thinking about it. They should be miserable. They should be wishing they could have stopped it. They should have survivor's guilt. All those different things lend credence to your story. They let the readers know that this character's death meant something to these people. So many times I will see in a story a character gets killed off, and then the survivors, they barely even think about it for a second, or they're beat up for maybe one scene, and then they move on as if it never happened. If you're doing that, it's just not honest storytelling. You want that death to have meaning. You want the survivors to struggle with it, to grasp with it, to maybe even become better people as a result of it, to challenge themselves to do better. You have to find a way for there to be a proper reaction to every major death you include in a story. My number 7 tip is to tie your story's theme into each death. Now this is something that it's a little more advanced. If you're a newer writer, you might not yet be comfortable with working with theme and tying it to different aspects of your story. But I think the easiest way to explain the idea of combining theme and death is to look at like a slasher film. Think about a story where maybe you have a group of teenagers and they're a bunch of bullies and they pick on people, and then some monster comes after them and the monster kills all the bullies except for maybe the kids who they weren't causing havoc for other people. And what would ultimately be suggested by this is that the lesson of the story would be that those who cause harm will receive harm, or something like that. That's just a crude example, just something I came up with right now, but you get the idea. If you have death sending a message to your audience, it will have more impact and it will make your story deeper. And this is something that we see in stories like Game of Thrones, where you have characters who they pay the price for their actions, and we learn a lesson about power and resisting power by looking at why characters die. I think a lot of times when we watch a show like Game of Thrones, we ask ourselves, why did that character die? What were the mistakes they made that led to their death? And that's something that makes a story compelling. So if you can do that, if you can tie a character's death into the theme of your story, make sure you roll with it. Your readers will love you for it. Now, my 8th and final tip is to be careful when you bring characters back to life. Whenever you bring a character back to life, for instance, in a fantasy story, or maybe like a horror story where there's black magic involved, whenever you bring someone back to life, there should be a cost. And if that cost is not severe enough, it's really going to diminish the impact of your story. Because if you're just bringing people back to life and the people who are resurrected are just totally fine, or they're more powerful than ever, what does that say about your story world? It's almost like sending the message that, wow, we should just seriously just kill off everybody because then they'll just be better off for it. And that's not the message you want to send. You want death to have impact, and if you're going to reverse the process of death, there should be some kind of a cost involved. Maybe the characters, they're not at 100%, or maybe they have something clouding their mind or messing with their brains or something like that. Maybe they can't think straight, or they're just, their body aches all over. They can still feel pain in the wound that killed them. And if you need an example of a story where a character is killed off and brought back to life at a cost, look up Stephen King's book Pet Sematary. That's one of the best examples out there. But regardless of what you do, if you are killing off characters and you plan on bringing them back, make sure it's very difficult to bring them back. It shouldn't be easier to cure death than it is to cure the common cold. And if you do make it that easy, your story world is only going to suffer as a result. So I hope this helps. Question of the day, what character's death disappointed you the most? Let me know in the comments section below, and also be sure to mark for spoilers. Just tell us what story it's from before you go into detail about it. Thanks for watching, guys. Be sure to check out my other videos. Hit that like and subscribe button for me, and remember to keep on writing.